Welcome to the Story Lab and this special episode. Today, instead of constructing a story, we will tell one that we have already come up with before. This is the full story of the Pop Culture Story Lab Star Wars Episode 9, a story about bringing back the balance in the Force. Star Wars Episode 9, The Guardians of Peace. The First Order holds the galaxy in a firm grip. With their superior technology, the descendants of the Empire corner the free races and rule them from their new capital world of Jurij. But the Resistance has not given up. With continuous support from subjugated systems, the Freedom Fighters resist the First Order and its dark ruler Kylo Ren. Grand Admiral Hux has ordered a major naval offensive to finish off the rebels once and for all. Outpost after outpost, the Star Destroyers are dismembering the last remaining holdouts of the Resistance. The movie begins with a big battle over a small world. An entire armada of Star Destroyers is firing at a small group of ships. In the first seconds of the scene, 2 Mon Calamari cruisers are shot to pieces and the emerging space fighters, chased by TIE fighters, are also destroyed. Only one X-Wing can make the leap into hyperspace. Meanwhile, 2 Dreadnought Star Destroyers fire their main guns at the planet's surface, where a huge area of land is torn out of the crust and vaporized. A small fountain of rubble rises from the surface of the planet. On the bridge of one of the cruisers, a general laughs smugly and gives instructions to pass on the good news to the Supreme Commander. We follow the lone escaping X-Wing, which comes out of hyperspace at a large asteroid field and approaches an ancient, seemingly abandoned space station. Poe Dameron lands in the main hangar, disembarks and immediately informs the incoming ground troops to assemble everyone. A worried C-3PO asks BB-8 what happened, to which he responds with beeps. Shortly thereafter, Poe faces the assembled remnant of the Resistance and sadly announces that General Leia Organa had been killed in the attack that he had just fled. General mourning follows. Major Dameron also announces that he will take command of the Resistance from now on. Everyone agrees. The assembly is dissolved. Poe takes Finn aside and they briefly discuss the outcome of the battle, the situation of the Resistance, and the years of struggle against the First Order. Then, Poe starts to talk about Rey, who had been absent from the meeting. The conversation reveals that something is wrong. Poe is planning an attack on a nearby First Order sensor outpost to raise morale and wants to know if Rey would participate. Finn promises to try. He leaves the room and comes through a back area of the hangar where Chewbacca is fixing something around the Millennium Falcon. Finn and Chewie exchange a few words, then Rose Tico appears on the landing pad. Finn walks towards her. The way they look at each other clearly reveals that the two are now a couple. In a warm embrace, the two mourn Leia's death. Then, Finn has to move on. As he strolls through the station, the interior leaves no doubt that this must be the very last hideout of the Resistance. Finn opens a door in a deserted corner of the station. In the dimly lit room behind it sits silently a completely changed Rey. Finn sees that he doesn't have to give her the painful news. He sits down next to Rey and begins to talk to her about Leia. Rey only thinks that the spark of hope is now finally lost. Finn, on the other hand, thinks Rey is that spark. But it's clear that Rey isn't right now. She begins to brood her musings and becomes angry. Her self-confidence seems to have faded away, the Force is strong with her, but she has no clue to how to use it for the good fight. Despite everything, the Resistance is still crushed, and the First Order is clearly in power. She also remembers how she had not been able to convert Kylo Ren and is reminded again how little she could do despite all her power. Finn now cautiously talks to her about the planned attack, but Rey doesn't even listen. So, Finn leaves. Outside the door he passes R2-D2 and C-3PO, having one of their typical conversations. R2-D2 would like to help Rey cheer up, while C-3PO says he has a bad feeling about this. The scenery changes completely as we get to Jurij. The small planet has 2 artificial rings full of defense systems. From a bird's eye view, the capital of the First Order looks like a vastly enlarged version of the First Order symbol. Right in the center stands a huge palace. In a wide dark room inside, a highly decorated Armitage Hux, now promoted to Grand Admiral and bearing a rank insignia bearing Thrawn's name, stands before a throne. In stark contrast to Hux, the Supreme Leader wears only a simple black robe and sits in the dark on his simple throne. He lacks the emanation of power that the Emperor had. Hux proudly reports the destruction of Leia's resistance base. Kylo Ren immediately asks if Rey was killed. Hux says no, but he does announce Leia's death. To Hux's disappointment, this causes Kylo Ren to become even more introverted. Ren begins a monologue in a sad voice. His problem is very similar to Rey's, though his power is huge, he is still unable to bring order. Instead, all he feels is the relentless compulsion to terror. Back at the Resistance base, Poe is discussing the planned attack with some officers, while Finn sits quietly in a corner and thinks. As soon as the meeting is finished, Poe comes over to his old friend and gives him even more information. Finn nods and then suddenly asks Poe if he could manage without Rey and him and if they could have a ship. Poe is perplexed but agrees. He asks where Finn was going. Finn answers, to Jurij. The droids in the background exchange anxious glances. In the next scene, a small transporter starts while preparations for the offensive are already underway in the hangar. Everything is organized as quickly as possible, then the pilots get in and the attack fighters start. Poe leads the squadron and has them jump to a nearby system. The attack begins. Finn's small transport ship comes out of hyperspace over Jurij and approaches the fortress of the First Order. 24 interceptors surround the transport. Finn contacts them, announces who they are and that he wants to speak to the Supreme Leader. Apparently, Kylo is actually interested in what they have to say, because the transporter gets permission to be landed with a tractor beam. Meanwhile, the Resistance's attack is going well. After some daring maneuvers, a small group of decommissioned Y-wing fighters set off on the sensor outpost and bombs it. Poe Dameron shoots the giant sensor bowl. With a shout of joy, he wins the battle. On Jurij, Finn and Rey are taken to the dark room of the Supreme Leader. They stand in front of the throne and look at Kylo, sitting in the dark, Hux to his left. Finn steps forward but is stunned when he discovers another figure to Kylo's right, Phasma. The stormtrooper captain greets him with contempt. Kylo asks what they want. Finn starts a speech to Kylo and Rey. He asks them to think about the nonsense of their actions, about the fact that the Force does not serve either of them, that the New Order and the continued galactic fight do not amount to anything, and that according to everything he understands, the Force does not do what it should. Therefore, the two Force users should set out to look for answers and find out what is wrong with the Force. Hux laughs at the seemingly nonsensical assignment and the fact that Finn felt he could command the Supreme Leader. But Kylo interrupts him, gets up and orders his ship to be prepared. Walking away, he turns to Rey and asks her to come with him. Rey joins her enemy without a word. The two leave and the rest remain silent. For a moment Hux continues to be perplexed but then immediately recovers into his rabid manner. He orders Finn to be arrested. Phasma grabs her old soldier and drags him away. Kylo Ren's shuttle leaves Jurij. On board, Kylo and Rey sit side by side, but do not speak. Finally, Rey asks where they are going. Kylo answers, to where it all began, to Tatooine, Vader and Luke's homeland. The two then talk briefly about their common master. Kylo thinks Luke is an old loser, while Rey praises him. After this argument, the two remain silent again. Poe Dameron returns to the hidden station, but immediately after the landing he is attacked by Rose, who wants to know where Finn is. Poe wants to talk himself out of the situation, but he can't. He has to tell her the truth. The scene changes to Finn in a tiny cell on Jurij. Phasma just knocked him to the ground and laughed at him. Finn takes it, but his anger is unmistakable. Phasma goes away. Finn is alone for a moment, then suddenly he hears something going on in the wall and a small droid falls out of the ventilation shaft. It is the clumsy maintenance droid RGT-2 PG-T3T, a further developed model of the mouse droid, which, however, can report articulately of its clumsiness. Finn immediately befriends the little droid, that he calls T3T. He asks him whether the droid could do him a favor. Meanwhile, Kylo's shuttle has arrived at Tatooine. Kylo and Rey silently examine the ruins of the Lars' house and roam the area separately. They meet at Kenobi's old hut. Together they descended into the old exile. Rey realizes how little it took for a Jedi to use his power to change the entire galaxy. Then, she discovers the instructions for building a lightsaber that Luke had left there all those years ago, when he had built his own green saber. With these instructions and the Force, Rey finally puts the blue sword back together. Kylo's gaze rests greedily on the lightsaber for a moment, but this time he resists the desire to grab it. Back on Jurij, the small maintenance droid T3T sneaks through the mighty fortress of the First Order. With some stumbling and via many hiding places, he arrives at a broadcasting station in the dome of the palace. There, he plugs into the general-purpose jack and sends a message. At the Resistance headquarters, an officer jumps up and calls Poe. T3T has sent a message from Finn. The Resistance knows what happened on Jurij. Rose also reads the communique and only says that they must go and rescue Finn. Poe nods meaningfully. On the other side of the galaxy, Kylo's ship comes out of hyperspace and floats toward Acto. Kylo and Rey land on the abandoned Jedi island and climb the stairs. Together they walk around the Jedi village. Kylo climbs up to the temple while Rey looks for the old tree. The fact that he is no longer there seems to deprive her of all hope. But the camera captures a small shoot of a new Jedi tree that is already growing again. A smile emerges on Rey's worried face. Then, she also goes to the temple and sees Ben standing by the stone looking down at it. The two suns illuminate it. 1,000 emotions are reflected in the Supreme Leader's face. When he notices Rey, he turns around and comes back to the hall. Both of them contemplate and speak a few words about Luke, this time agreeing. He had been their common master, both of them had been close to him. In the silence, they open themselves completely to the force of this place. They hear voices of all kinds, old forgotten languages, newer, Luke's words, Rey's, until all of a sudden, one message from beyond space and time is broadcast crystal clear. Go to the Dagobah system. In the asteroid field, where the Resistance is hiding, hundreds of lights suddenly go on. Whole cruisers and fighter squadrons are illuminated in the asteroid craters. Everything's getting ready to go. Rose and Poe are on their way to the hangar, talking about the company's prospects of storming the First Order capital. The droids meet them and talk about the same. R2-D2 encourages the pessimistic C-3PO. In the next scene, all the ships of the Resistance leave, all kinds of different models rising up and all jumping into hyperspace. As if he had heard the jump, Finn wakes up. But you can see right away, it's just a small hatch that moves. Already Finn wants to look away again, then there comes T3T stumbling out. Finn quickly talks to the droid. T3T confirms his success. Finn looks at the ceiling of his prison with satisfaction. Elsewhere in the city though, Hux looks incredulously at the message that an attack fleet is approaching Jurij. He orders alert and sends Phasma to prepare her troops. Over Jurij, the Resistance fleet emerges from hyperspace. With a quick attack, they blow their way through Fortress Ring 1 and let the fighters rush down on the city. Defensive fire is starting immediately, and it burns fighter after fighter. Plus, TIE fighters come from all over the world. The battle has begun. Dagobah, we see the swampy landscape and all kinds of creatures. Everything chirps and rustles. It's raining. Ray sits on a tree and looks at the miracle of life. Kylo stands undecided next to her and looks in all directions. The ship is in the background. The camera focuses on Ray, who slowly closes her eyes and listens to the Force. For a moment, everything goes silent, then all the sounds of life come back, but not the rain. The energy is practically palpable. Ray smiles. She tells what she perceives, all the life, the energy, the Force, as pure as it can be. Surprised, she opens her eyes as she notices that Ben is no longer beside her. The young man is strolling around and seems drawn to a cave. We're not following him as he goes in. Instead, we see Ray looking for him and calling through the woods. A giant figure emerges from the swamp behind her. It's a swamp monster. It's rushing down on Ray. She defends herself with her lightsaber as best she can and calls out to Ben. Then, she repeats the call in the Force. Ben immediately climbs out of the cave. We don't see what happened to him, but he rushes to aid Ray. Together, using the Force, they get the monster under control and can let it dive back into the swamp. They look at each other relieved. The dynamics have changed a lot. Kylo says he knows where to go next, Coruscant. The ship starts immediately, and as it enters hyperspace, Ray sits next to Ben and asks him why they were going to the old capital. Kylo recounts what happened to him in the cave. He had to face both sides of the Force that appeared to him in the form of Snoke and his father. Ray puffs up at Solo's mention and the two exchange 2 or 3 words about their common father. Kylo then goes on to explain that he killed both characters as he had in real life, to prevent them from speaking further. But Snoke's voice had not been muted, and a larger shadow had appeared behind him. The voice had changed to Ben's and finally to a loud, cold laugh. Then, he had heard Ray's voice calling for help. Ray nods, but still doesn't understand what this has to do with Coruscant. Kylo explains that he believes he had heard the laughter once before, on Coruscant, when he had been there with Snoke. He now wants to return to the Empire's main world, into the midst of evil. In the battle over Jurana, Poe calls for bombing the power plants. During the attack, one Resistance cruiser is destroyed, and the other crashes into the city. Poe orders the large ships to retreat while instructing the fighters to land. At that moment, a meandering A-fighter manages to maneuver into the power plant, and it goes up in flames. Meanwhile, Rose's fighter is shot down and falls on the city. She can save herself with an ejector seat. In the prison, the lights go out. Emergency lighting is coming online, but the doors aren't locked anymore. Finn, who is still talking to T3T, immediately jumps to the exit and stands out into the corridor. A guard is coming, but T3T can take it. Finn grabs the guard's blaster and continues his escape. At the same time, Rose orientates herself on the ground and discovers the prison. At a fast pace, she makes her way there. Finn and T3T are fighting through a corridor. The droid rushes forward and takes out some guards with a combination of skill and luck. Finn defeats the remaining stormtroopers. Then he calls T3T, who answers shrilly. Finn turns around and discovers Phasma crushing the droid in her fist. T3T groans one last desperate F in, and falls apart. Finn storms at Phasma. The greatest of their fights to date follow. This time Phasma has the advantage because Finn is furious with anger. But then he rips off her helmet. The female stormtrooper knocks Finn to the ground and lifts her spear to give him the final blow. But her chest suddenly explodes, and she turns around in amazement, while falling down to her knees. Rose had shot her from behind, a grim expression of satisfaction on her face. Rose helps Finn stand up. Then, they escape from the prison block. Somewhere between the myriad buildings of the city, on what looks like a giant junkyard, the two meet the rest of the downed Resistance troops, including Poe and Chewie, who have both landed on the surface. Finn thanks his rescuers, but Poe cautions that they were not out yet. He briefly explains the situation. The pilots can't hope to get the fighters off the ground, let alone the crew of the crashed transporter. They must fight their way to a First Order hangar. The Resistance prepares for battle. Everybody is taking up blasters. Poe looks around and gives an encouraging speech about courage, resistance, perseverance, camaraderie, and what Leia would have said at that moment. Then they rush out. Coruscant, the former capital of the galaxy, is a gigantic ghost town. Rey and Kylo move through the empty caverns between buildings, walking towards the former Jedi temple. They don't seem to find anything at first, but both feel a tremendous dark presence. Finally, they decide to join forces. They sit down and stretch out their hands to each other, connecting through the Force. As their thoughts enter the former Imperial Palace, the presence of evil thickens, and both hear the cold laughter. Rey notes that this presence felt exactly like what Luke had described he had felt in Ben that fateful night. Ben, in turn, thinks that the laughter had taken possession of his soul all those years ago, when he destroyed Luke's temple. It seems that everything points to the same place, Luke's destroyed Jedi school. An inconspicuous planet had been the home of the first new Jedi temple. The shuttle stands a bit to the side, while Rey and Ben search the ruins. Rey is amazed by the buildings, while Ben is tormented by the memories. They talk to each other for a while. Now it feels like they're brother and sister. Ben speaks openly and with heart. Now, he calls himself a Jedi for the first time. Rey smiles happily. Rey connects with the Force and feels the evil presence with unbelievable clarity. Behind the temple rises a stony chain of hills. Rey climbs up a bit and discovers an entrance to a deep cave behind some boulders. She calls for Ben. Together they enter. Torches illuminate the cave passage, which after a few hundred meters expands to a small underground hall. Ghostly red light illuminates the hall evenly, so that one can clearly see what is inside. Along the wall stand 6 dark figures in robes and with black breastplates. When the Jedi enter, each of them lights a red lightsaber. In the middle of the hall stands a pedestal with a red tetrahedron at the top. The Sith holocron is opened and a dark shadow rises from it. At the opening of the hall, Kylo and Rey stop and look at the dark figure. It manifests itself more and more clearly to a larger-than-life image of the former Emperor. The two are amazed. Palpatine begins a speech in which he explains that he kept himself alive with the holocron in order to one day take revenge on the galaxy. He had apprehended a freighter captain in the Outer Rim that he turned into Snoke and had used to create the First Order. He had corrupted Luke Skywalker's students and turned them to the dark side. These Knights of Ren, he explains, were the dark figures that guarded his holocron. Suddenly, the Emperor becomes enraged when he looks straight to Kylo, who had betrayed him and his plans for revenge. The Emperor curses Rey as well, who would not let him use the blood of the Skywalker again, and he curses Snoke, who had failed in spite of all the power the Emperor had given him. Slowly, Rey realizes that the war between the First Order and the Resistance had no real reason at all. It was only Palpatine's ego seeking revenge against the entire galaxy. Those were the only reasons for the endless fighting. Palpatine laughs as she recites this to him, and confirms her suspicions. Then, the Shadow hurls lightning from his semi-transparent form at throwing Kylo to the ground and Rey back against the wall. Kylo ignites his lightsaber, but the Emperor pulls it to him and crushes it in his ghostly fist. Again, he tortures Kylo, then he suddenly twitches and seems to be struggling with something. Rey has gotten back up and tries to squeeze Palpatine back into his holocron using the Force. The Emperor pulls back and orders his knights to take care of the Jedi. The Knights of Ren come at the all at the same time and Rey can barely hold them off with her lightsaber. Ben is still on the ground, pained by the lighting attack. As the knights approach, he slowly recovers, looks up and stretches out his hand towards the cave wall as if to grab something. Far away, a sound is heard. An unidentifiable object rises up from the destroyed temple in the valley below and flies toward the mountains. Within seconds, it crashes right through the cave wall and into Ben's waiting hand. As Ben activates the green blade, we recognize the lightsaber of Luke Skywalker, once again wielded by a Jedi of the Skywalker bloodline. Fighting side by side once more, Rey and Ben make quick work of the Knights of Ren, and Palpatine's spirit cries out in ever greater anger. Now, Palpatine attacks again, using all his strength to hurl even more lightning at the Jedi. But the two dodge the attack and reposition themselves, standing against opposite walls of the cave, facing each other. Between them rises the spirit of the Emperor. The powerful Dark Force user tries to drive the Jedi away, but they too use the Force. In the mirror image of the scene, when Rey and Ben had pulled the Skywalker lightsaber apart, they now both press against Palpatine's ghostly form. And they succeed. The Emperor's spirit collapses and grows smaller and weaker. Eventually, he disappeared completely into holocron. But even now, Rey and Ben continue to pressure the spot, so that the holocron is compressed and gets smaller and smaller. When Rey and Ben lower their hands, all that remains of Palpatine is a super dense pitch-black diamond, which for a moment tumbles on the base, where the holocron had stood, then falls down and breaks into 1,000 pieces on the ground. The spirit has been defeated. For a moment everything is silent. Then, Rey says that it is now time to end the war, and Ben agrees. On Jurij, the Resistance is still fighting. They hadn't gotten far. On a large open area with just a bit of cover to either side, they now face a whole battalion of stormtroopers. Hux stands in the middle of the formation, surrounded by his officers, just like Poe, Finn, and other leaders on the Resistance's side. Shots are exchanged in the thousands, many die. Then, the view changes, and we see the battle from above, where suddenly the black V-shaped ship of Rey and Kylo comes into view. It hovers over the no man's land between the two armies. From below we see two figures jumping out of the ship and landing in the middle of the square. The two figures stand back to back, in one hand each a lightsaber directed to the ground, one blue, the other green. The second hand both have raised as a stop sign directly towards the two opposing forces. With the Force, they have stopped all blaster bolts in the air. For a moment Rey and Ben let the scenery stand, then they let the blaster bolts rush into the air, lower their hands again, and go back to making the stop sign. Rey is facing the Resistance, Ben is facing the First Order. Nobody moves. Speaking alternately, Rey and Ben proclaim the victory over evil, the end of the war, the beginning of a new order, and the rebirth of the Jedi as guardians of peace. They then change their hand position at the same time, now making an inviting gesture to the two leaders in the respective hiding places. Poe and Hux slowly get up and walk out onto the field. The soldiers on both sides are also rising. The Jedi line up side by side and continue to invite Hux and Poe with open hands. The two leaders reach the Jedi, standing close together in the middle of the field, and then, after a tense moment, they finally shake hands. Immediately, the tense atmosphere is gone. The war is over. Both Jedi keep smiling. The stormtroopers lower their weapons, the Resistance members embrace each other. Some rush up to the leaders in the middle and congratulate them. Hux officers are proud of their Grand Admiral. BB-8 circles joyfully around Poe. Some stormtroopers take off their helmets and smile admiringly at Rey. Some teenage Resistance members, in return, admire Ben, including older versions of the kids from Cantonica. Everyone jumps, laughs, and cries hooray. Zooming out of the center, we see Chewbacca patting Rey on the back, Rose and Finn arm in arm, familiar faces smiling happily, etc. until finally, at the very end of the field, R2-D2 and C-3PO come into view. "Oh, how nice," says C-3PO, and R2-D2 squeaks back. Then, opposite the young Jedi, far away from the former opponents, a number of transparent, shimmering figures come into view. One stands slightly in front of the others, all with their backs to the viewer and their eyes on Rey and Ben. The four spirits are easily recognizable as former Jedi, including Leia, Anakin, Yoda, and Kenobi. One of them says he would never have guessed that it would all end like this. At which point the figure in front turns around and Luke Skywalker says to the 3 other Force spirits, "No, but we can be proud of them."